Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, obviously, a very historic vote this week in Washington, D.C. You and the Democrats and a small number of Republicans voted to oust Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Why did you vote that way? And what's your reaction to the fact that he's out?
So I voted that way simply because we need a speaker that is a speaker for the entirety of the House, that understands the importance of building real relationships and acknowledging when it's time to actually work across the aisle. Democrats worked really hard to make sure that we could keep the government open. All Democrats, except for one, voted to keep the government open for the 45-day continuing resolution that was passed. McCarthy, on the other hand, blamed the Democrats for the fact that we were heading towards a shutdown and completely ignored the fact that over 90 of his members voted against it and actually wanted to shut the government down. He also showed that he could not be trusted with making an agreement with our president. We shouldn't have been here because my president decided that he would engage in conversations about the budget as it relates to the debt ceiling. And those are two completely different things, but he did it anyway. So, you know what? Honestly, we just want an honest broker. Even if you're telling us we're not going to do anything, at least be honest about it. And we couldn't find that in McCarthy.
So let me ask you, were there conversations that you were part of or that you heard of where Republican members of Congress were asking Democrats to save McCarthy's job and to keep him in place?
So no Republicans asked me. They probably knew where I would stand. But as a member of the leadership team for the House Democrats, I can tell you that McCarthy did not talk to Democratic leadership as well. He just thought that it was going to magically happen and he would magically be saved. That's not how you govern. And that's honestly not how you count. And I do want to remind people, I know that Matt Gaetz is an easy target and everyone's blaming Matt Gaetz or they're blaming the eight, or even the Republicans want to blame the Democrats. But at the end of the day, this is a rule that was changed by McCarthy. This is what he decided he would do in order to seek his speakership. He could have stood his ground, as many before him have, and not allowed so much power to be emboldened to just one person. He made his bed and now he's laying in it.
Let me ask you about that rule, because I know that has been historically the rule. Speaker Pelosi changed it and Democrats changed it. And do you think it should go back to that so that more members, it's a higher bar. You need more members to call for a vacating of the chair?
I absolutely believe if you are going to govern in such a tight majority, it's probably in your interest to make sure that there's at least a coalition that can bring this. It's my understanding that the minority party can't bring it. So it can only be brought by the majority party in the first place. So it's not any one member. No Democrat could have brought it if they wanted to bring it. Um, I probably would not do it if I was the speaker, simply because it's a disruption. As we see now, we absolutely have yet another deadline for keeping the government open. And, McCarthy said that there were personality issues that he struggled with within his caucus. And he feels as if this is more personality driven than policy driven. I don't know. I've not been a part of those conversations, but you have a lot of different personalities in Congress. And so I do think that it's disruptive in a time in which we honestly can't afford to be disruptive. And if I were speaker, I never would have gone for it. And going forward, I know that it's a rule that the Republicans want changed. But I don't know if they will get it changed because they still have to build a consensus across the aisle, a place that seemingly they don't want to go.
So let me ask you, do you think that this change in leadership is going to help Democrats or hurt Democrats?
I think that we net nothing. I don't think it's a net gain. I don't think it's a net loss. Because right now, it's not necessarily just McCarthy. I mean, people are describing the Republicans that are currently in control in the House as the chaos caucus. And it's not just the eight. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you and tell you that there were other members that did not want to vote for McCarthy either, that did vote for him, and they voted for him because they felt like they were going to need his help with fundraising for their elections because they're facing some pretty tough elections. But to be clear, it was more than 8 people that did not want McCarthy. And so I think that they have a lot of turmoil, and this is only brought that turmoil back to the surface, as we saw with the 15 rounds that it took for McCarthy to get there in the first place. I honestly don't anticipate that we will really get to where the American people need us to get to until we have our elections that are coming up and end up hopefully with a new majority in the Democrats. Because one thing's for sure, we're a big tent party. We have a lot of different opinions, but one thing that we always do is we focus in on the people first. And you've not seen shutdowns under Democratic leadership. That has only happened under Republican leadership. It is a really sad state of affairs, but I think that it is clear and it is transparent of where the current elected officials on that side stand. And I think that they're going to be in for a reckoning.
Let me ask you, there are 3 candidates who've been mentioned so far. You've got Steve Scalise, the House Majority Leader. You've got the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Kevin Hern of Oklahoma, who chairs the Republican Study Committee. Do you have a preference if you're going to have any Republican speaker?
I don't have a preference, but I can tell you that I absolutely think some people have a better shot at gaining the support of the Republican caucus than others. I think if someone really wanted to be smart and wanted to focus on governing, they probably should take a candidate who's in a Biden whatever district. I mean, I say whatever because everybody's kind of in different kind of Biden +5, Biden +10. They should probably take someone that's in a stance in which they need to show that they can work across the aisle. We're not going to get there. They have a 4-seat majority right now, and the Senate is democratically controlled, as well as the presidency is a Democrat. So you can't get far right bills passed that are doing these crazy cuts that no one can survive with. So, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You need someone that understands that they need to work across the aisle. And honestly, my vote will continually be for Speaker Jeffries, who will become the speaker sooner, hopefully rather than later. And honestly, if you were really trying to be strategic, we don't have the numbers to pass all of the legislation that we would want to get passed in the House anyway. If there was a Speaker Jeffries, they would literally, we would always have to go and work with them to get anything done because we don't have the numbers. But you know what? One thing is for sure, Jeffries would always know how many members of his caucus he could deliver. He also would be an honest broker. And honestly, there's a lot of members of the Republican caucus, they don't trust the majority of the people that are running. We know that Jim Jordan won't make it. He just won't. He will not be the consensus builder. I'm sure the 8 would love to vote for him, but he's not the guy that's going to make it. Scalise has potentially a chance of making it. But no matter who's in that seat, if they choose not to work with Democrats, they are potentially facing the same fate that McCarthy faced.
And let me ask you one other question about this entire situation. And you're concerned about, because now we've got what, less than 40 days
Yeah.
for the next potential shutdown. How confident are you that there will be spending bills passed? Because Republicans I spoke with said they want Republican spending, or they want spending bills passed, and so that they're not having to rely on these continuing resolutions.
Um, I'm gonna keep it clean. They're being a little less than honest, is how I will say that. Here's the deal. They've had over 9 months to pass spending bills, and they've not done it. So if you couldn't get it done in over 9 months, I'm not really the most optimistic that you're going to get it done now. And to be clear, what they're passing is nothing more than messaging bills. Yesterday I said I never thought that I would agree with Matt Gaetz, right? But Matt Gaetz made it plain. They're not passing bills that they ever anticipate will actually go into law. They know that they won't go into law. They just want to talk about it. And so that's not what it's going to take to keep the government open. I mean, to have a backdoor conversation with a Republican member as I'm fighting for full funding for agriculture, not just because we need to make sure that those that are reliant upon SNAP benefits have the money that they need to make sure that they can eat in this time of inflation, but also for our farmers. We know that we've got farmers all throughout the state of Texas. I have been fighting for full funding in agriculture, and I've talked to other Republicans on the ag committee, Republicans that agreed to vote for the ag bill. And they said, we know it's terrible. We don't want it, but we'll just let the Senate fix it. I mean, that's where we are. They're passing bills that they know will never pass. They just want to blame Democrats and say, well, Democrats were unreasonable, so we had to do this. I honestly need them to grow up and be realistic, talk about the fact that we're dealing with record inflation, and therefore we have to make the adjustments in how we fund things such as agriculture. They don't want to have the real conversations about the fact that we are missing the workforce that we need in the federal government to make sure that people are getting their Social Security, that they're getting their IRS checks. We don't have the manpower, so therefore you have to fund this. Or even when we start talking about the border, you have to make sure that I'm the one that's talked to border agents. I don't know how many of them have. We've got to make sure that the funding is there because no one wants to take these jobs. And as it relates to the immigration issues, if you have immigration courts that are overrun and we're not giving them the funding, then we are basically on a hamster wheel, literally just going in circles and blaming people with instead of looking within and recognizing that we have to fully fund the government if we want the government to work.
Last question I had, and that was this report that came out about the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas saying that they need to build barriers down in Starr County in Texas along in the Rio Grande Valley. What do you make of that? Because that seems to be a change from the Biden administration's policy that they now want to build some kind of barrier, whether it be a wall, in Starr County.
Yeah, so I would not attribute this to the administration. What I will attribute to the administration is them making good on what was passed into law. So this is funding, and this is another good point to make, Jack. Most people think if the government does a bill today, then tomorrow it's fixed. That is not true. We, as of right now, we've been talking about our appropriations. So I believe it was FY19 appropriations in which this money was appropriated. When that money was appropriated, basically it was appropriated only for this. So unlike our governor, who will take money and reshuffle it around when he's not supposed to, this is exactly what it was appropriated for. And so the administration is not trying to break the law or do something unscrupulous by sending this money somewhere else. It's what it was appropriated for. And it's my understanding that that came out of the Trump administration. So I believe that it came out of 18's kind of fight for the 19 budget. And that's what was signed into law by Trump. And so therefore, they're not trying to take the money and do something else with it.
Is it an acknowledgement that the border wall is needed, at least down in that particular area, to keep migrants from coming into Texas?
I don't think that it's an acknowledgement of that. I think it's an acknowledgement of an administration that will follow through on appropriations. This money was set aside for that by the Trump administration. Now, I could see the Trump administration doing whatever they wanted to do with money and worrying about being maybe sued about it later. But this administration has decided to make good on what Trump signed into law. And that's what the money was appropriated for. I don't think it means anything more or less. I will tell you, though, that if you've ever heard the stories of those that have come, there are those that have lost their lives on the trek. There are those that have almost lost their lives on the trek. Or my colleague Veronica Escobar has talked about the savagery that has taken place as it relates to women and children as they have made this trek. When you are willing to risk your life, I can guarantee you that a wall isn't going to be the obstacle that's going to stop you. But what we need to do is make sure that if someone is actually seeking asylum and has an actual asylum case, that we get that processed. It doesn't make sense that it's a 7-year wait until we get through asylum cases. By then, we don't know what the status was or what your status was 7 years ago. It is too difficult. And the final point that I'll make is something that we've not talked about, but it's this idea that American dollars should only fund things in America. I need to be clear. When it comes to foreign policy and immigration issues, we need to do what we've always done really, really well. And that means that we support those modern day democracies that are struggling and we help to stabilize them. If we have areas that are stabilized and there's not all of the turmoil going on, then we can be put in a situation where people won't be looking to leave their homes, but instead they will stay where they are. That is what it looks like to protect America. It is spending our dollars in a very smart way on foreign policy. It is also investing in those that are doing the work, whether it's at the border or whether it's in the immigration courts or whether it's somewhere in the immigration cycle in general, not just the courts.
But you agree with, because Republicans said that President Biden was very much opposed to a wall or some kind of barrier along, people said they don't work. And so now that they've requested this, because there's an urgent need down there, what do you say to Republicans to say, see, we told you?
Once again, I don't think that this is a matter of bowing down to the Republican way. I don't think that anything about the data has changed. This is simply about, this is what was signed into law, and honoring that there's nothing else we can do with that money because this is what it was appropriated for.
Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.